What up, children? We are gonna continue reading The Mind's Eye, and we're gonna start with the first chapter. What's the first chapter called, you ask me? I am not quite sure. I need to check. It's called. So this is the part one of The Mind's Eye. It's called The Mind's Eye, and it's written by Douglas R. Hofstadter and Daniel C. Dennett. And this is part one: a sense and a self. How can I read stuff so badly? It's called A Sense of Self. And we're gonna try to complete as much as possible of the chapter 1 of that. It's called Borgs and I. Yeah, I think it's written by someone that I've heard of. Who is that person? Who is that person? And it's by Jorge Luis Borges, or I don't know how it's pronounced correctly, to be honest. And where's my mobile charger? Give me the damn charger, goddammit. Alright, welcome. I'm gonna mute the music so you'll just have the visual of these psychedelic hallucinogenic images in front of you, and I'm gonna start reading Borges and I. If you want a free reading of the book, it's available at themindi.blogspot.com. themindi.blogspot.com. So this is chapter 1 of The Mind's Eye by Douglas R. Hofstadter and Daniel C. Dennett. It's called Borges and I. Alright, the other one, the one called Borges, is the one things happen to. I walked through the streets of Buenos Aires and stopped for a moment, perhaps mechanically now, to look at the arch of an entrance hall and the grillwork on the gate. I know of Borges from the mall and see his name on a list of professors or in a biographical dictionary. I like hourglasses, maps, 18th century typography, the taste of coffee, and the prose of Stevenson. He shares these preferences, but in a vain way that turns them into the attributes of an actor. It would be an exaggeration to say that ours is a hostile relationship. I live, let myself go on a living, so that Borges may contrive his literature, and this literature justifies me. I'll have the music actually. It's no effort for me to confess that he has achieved some valid pages, but those pages cannot save me, perhaps because what is good belongs to no one, not even to him, but rather to the language and tradition. Just a quick detour. I'm checking if the stream's working. The stream is working, so we are good to go. Alright. Besides, I'm destined to perish, definitively, and only some instant of myself can survive in him. Little by little, I'm giving over everything to him, though I'm quite aware of his perverse custom of falsifying and magnifying things. Spinoza knew that all things long to persist in their being. Stone eternally wants to be a stone, the tiger a tiger. I shall remain in Borges, not in myself. But I recognize myself less in his books than in many others or in the laborious drum. Borges and I by Jorge Luis Borges, translated by James E. Irby from Labyrinth. Whatever. So this was an excerpt from his book, Borges and I. Alright. Reflections. Jorge Luis Borges, the great Argentinian writer, has a deserved international reputation which creates a curious effect. Borges seems to himself to be two people, the public personage and the private person. His fame magnifies the effect, but we can all share the feeling, as he knows. You read your name on a list or see a candid photograph of yourself. You read your name on a list or see a candid photograph of yourself, or overhear others talking about someone and suddenly realize it's you. Your mind must leap from a third-person perspective, he or she, to a first-person perspective, I. Comedians have long known how to exaggerate this leap. The classic double take in which, say, Bob Hope reads in the newspaper that Bob Hope is wanted by the police, casually comments on this fact, and then jumps in alarm. That's me! While Robert Burns may be right that it's a gift to see ourselves as others see us, it's not a condition to which we could or should aspire at all times. In fact, several philosophers have recently presented brilliant arguments to show that there are two fundamentally and irreducible different ways of thinking for ourselves. The arguments are quite technical, but the issues are fascinating and can be vividly illustrated. Pete is waiting in line to pay for an item in a department store, and he notices that there's a closed-circuit television monitor over the counter. One of the store's measures against shoplifters. He as watches the jostling crowd of people on the monitor, he realizes that the person on the left side of the screen in the overcoat carrying the large paper bag is having his pocket picked by the person behind him. Then as he raises his hand to his mouth in astonishment, he notices that the victim's hand is moving to his mouth in just the same way. Pete suddenly realizes that he's the person whose pocket is being picked. This dramatic shift is a discovery. Pete comes to know something he didn't know a moment before, and of course it's important. Without the capacity to entertain all the sorts of thoughts that now galvanize him into defensive action, he would hardly be capable of action at all. But before the shift, he wasn't entirely ignorant. Of course, he was thinking about the person in the overcoat and seeing that the person was being robbed. And since the person in the overcoat is himself, he was thinking about himself. But he wasn't thinking about himself as himself. He wasn't thinking about himself in the right way. For another example, imagine someone reading a book in which a descriptive noun phrase of say 3 dozen words in the first sentence of a paragraph portrays an unnamed person of initially indeterminate sex who's performing an everyday activity. The reader of the book, on reading the given phrase, obediently manufactures in his or her mind's eye a simple, rather vague mental image of a person involved in some mundane activity. In the next few sentences, as more detail is added to the description, the reader's mental image of the whole scenario comes into a little sharper focus. Then at a certain moment after the description has gotten quite specific, something suddenly clicks, and the reader gets an eerie sense that he or she is the very person being described. How stupid of me not to recognize earlier that I was reading about myself. The reader muses, feeling a little sheepish but also a little sheepish but also quite tickled. You can probably imagine such a thing happening, but to help you imagine it more clearly, just suppose that the book involved was The Mind's Eye. Oh, mind blown. Fuck. There now, doesn't your mental image of the whole scenario come into a little sharper focus? Doesn't it all suddenly click? What page did you imagine the reader as reading? What paragraph? What thoughts might have crossed the reader's mind? If the reader were a real person, what might he or she be doing right now? I didn't even think about that. He got me. It's not easy to describe something of such special self-representation. Suppose a computer is programmed to control the locomotion and the behavior of a robot to which it's attached by radio links. The computer contains a representation of the robot and its environment, and as the robot moves around, the representation changes accordingly. This permits the computer program to control the robot's activities with the aid of up-to-date information about the robot's body and the environment it finds itself in. Now, suppose the computer represents a robot as located in the middle of an empty room, and suppose you were asked to translate to English the computer's internal representation. Should it be "it is in the center of an empty room" or "I am in the center of an empty room"? This question resurfaces in different guise in part 4 of this book. This is some mind-screwing things. These are some mind-screwing things. Anyway, this was the end of the first chapter of the first part. We'll get to the second chapter of the first part. It's called On Having No Head. The best day of my life, my rebirth day, so to speak, was when I found I had no head. This is not a literary gambit, a witticism designed to arouse interest at any cost. I mean it in all seriousness. I have no head. It was about 18 years ago, when I was 33, that I made the discovery. Though it certainly came out of the blue, it did so in response to an urgent inquiry. I had for several months been absorbed in the question, what am I? The fact that I happened to be walking in the Himalayas at the time probably had little to do with it, though in that country unusual states of mind are said to come more easily. However that may be, a very still clear day and a view from the ridge where I stood over misty blue valleys to the highest mountain range in the world, with Kanchenjunga and Everest unprominent among its snow peaks, made a setting worthy of the grandest vision. What actually happened was something absurdly simple and unspectacular. I stopped thinking. A peculiar, quiet, and odd kind of alert limpness or numbness came over me. Reason and imagination and all mental chatter died down. For once, words really failed me. Past and future dropped away. I forgot who and what I was, my name, manhood, animalhood, and all that I could be called mine. It was as if I had been born that instant, brand new, mindless, innocent of all memories. There existed only the now, that present moment, and what was clearly given in it. look was enough. And what I found was khaki trouser legs terminating select tunes from On Having No Head by E. Darling. All I found was khaki trouser legs terminating downwards in a pair of brown shoes, khaki sleeves terminating sideways in a pair of pink hands, and a khaki shirt front terminating upwards in absolutely nothing whatever. Certainly not in a head. It took me no time at all to notice this nothing. This hole where a head should have been was no ordinary vacancy, no mere nothing. On the contrary, it was a nothing that found room for everything. Room for grass, trees, shadowy distant hills, and far beyond them snow peaks like a row of angular clouds riding the blue sky. I had lost a head and gained a world. It was after all quite literally breathtaking. I seemed to stop breathing altogether, absorbed in the given. Here it was, this superb scene brightly shining in the clear air, alone and unsupported, mysteriously suspended in the void, and this was a real miracle. The wonder and delight utterly free of me, unsustained by any observer. Its total presence was my total absence, body and soul. Lighter than air, clearer than glass, altogether released from myself, I was from nowhere around. Yet in spite of the magical and uncanny quality of this vision, it was no dream, no esoteric revelation. Quite the reverse, it felt like a sudden waking from the sleep of ordinary life and into dreaming. An end to dreaming. It was self-luminous reality for once swept clean of all obscuring mind. It was the revelation at long last of the perfectly obvious. It was a lucid moment in a confused life history. It was a ceasing to ignore something which I had always been too busy or too clever to see. It was naked, uncritical attention to what had all along been staring at me in the face, staring me in the face, my utter facelessness. In short, it was all perfectly simple and plain, straightforward, beyond argument, thought, and words. There arose no questions, no reference beyond the experience itself, but only peace and a quiet joy, and the sensation of having dropped an intolerable burden. As the wonder of my Himalayan discovery began to wear off, I started describing it to myself in some such words as the following. Somehow or the other, I had vaguely thought of myself as inhabiting this house which is my body and looking out through its two round windows at the world. Now I find that it isn't really like that at all. As I gaze into the distance, well, what is there at this moment to tell me how many eyes I have here? 2 or 3 or hundreds or none? In fact, only one window appears on this side of my facade, and that is wide open and frameless with nobody looking out of it. It's always the other fellow who has eyes and a face to frame them, never this one. There exist, then, two widely different species of man. The first of which I note countless specimens evidently carries a head on its shoulders, and by head I mean a hairy 8-inch ball with various holes in it, while the second of which I note only this one specimen evidently carries no such thing on its shoulders. Until now I had overlooked this considerable difference, victim of a prolonged fur of madness, of a lifelong hallucination, and by hallucination I mean what my dictionary says, apparent perception of an object not actually present. I had invariably seen myself as pretty much like other men, and certainly never as decapitated but still living biped. I had been blind to the one thing that's always present and without which I am blind indeed, to this marvelous substitute for a head, this unbounded charity, this luminous and absolutely pure void which nevertheless is rather than contains all things. For however carefully I attend, I fail to find here even so much as a blank screen on which they are reflected, or a transparent lens or aperture through which they are viewed, still less a soul or a mind to which they are presented, or a viewer who is distinguishable from the view. Nothing whatever intervenes, not even that baffling and elusive obstacle called distance. The huge blue sky, the pink-edged whiteness of the snows, the sparkling green of the grass. How can these be remote when there's nothing to be remote from? The headless void here refuses all definition and location. It's not round or small or big, or even here as distinct from there. And even if there were a head here to measure outwards from, the measuring rod stretching from it to the peak of the Everest would then read end on, and there's no way for me to read it, reduced to a point, to nothing. In fact, those colored shapes present themselves in all simplicity, without any such complications as near or far, this or that, mine or not mine, seen by me or merely given. All two-ness, all duality of subject and object has vanished. It's no longer read into a situation which has no room for it. Such were the thoughts which followed the vision. To try to set down the first-hand immediate experience in these or any other terms, however, is to misrepresent it by complicating what's quite simple. Indeed, The longer the postmortem examination drags on, the further it gets from the living original, at best. These descriptions can remind me of the vision without the bright awareness or invited recurrence of it, but the most appetizing menu can taste like the dinner or the best book about humor enable one to see a joke. On the other hand, it's impossible to stop thinking for long, and some attempt to relate the lucid intervals of one's life with confused backgrounds is inevitable. It could also encourage indirectly the recurrence of lucidity. What the fuck is it talking about? I'm completely lost. In any case, there are several common sense objections which refuse to be put off any longer, questions which insist on reasoned answers, however inconclusive. It becomes necessary to justify one's vision even to oneself, and also one's friends may need reassuring. In a sense, this attempt at domestication is absurd because no argument can add or take from an experience which is as plain as and incontrovertible as hearing middle C or tasting strawberry jam. In another sense, however, the attempt has to be made if one's life is not disintegrated into two quite alien idea-tight compartments. What is he even talking about, man? What is this? I'm in a freaking trance right now. This music and whatever I'm reading is so lit. My first objection was that my head may be missing, but not its nose. Here it is, visibly preceding me wherever I go. And my answer was, if this fuzzy, pinkish, yet perfectly transparent cloud suspended on my right, and this other similar cloud suspended on my left are my noses, then count two of them and I count two of them and not one. And the perfectly opaque single protuberance which I observe so clearly in the middle of your face is not a nose. Only a hopeless dishonest or a confused observer would deliberately use the same name for such utterly different things. I prefer to go by my dictionary and common usage, which obliges me to say that, whereas nearly all other men have a nose apiece, I have none. All the same, if some misguided skeptic, over anxious to make his point, were to strike out in his direction, aiming midway through these two pink clouds, the result would surely be as unpleasant as if I owned the most solid and punchable of noses. Again, what about this complex of subtle tensions, movements, pressures, itches, tickles, aches, warmths, throbbings, never entirely absent from the central region? Above all, what about these touch feelings which arise when I explore here with my hand? Surely these findings add up to massive evidence for the evidence of my head right here, now. After all, they do nothing of the sort. No doubt a great variety of sensations are plainly given here and cannot be ignored, but they don't amount to a head or anything like one. The only way to make a head out of them would be to throw in all sorts of ingredients that are plainly missing here, in particular all manner of colored shapes in three dimensions. What sort of head is it that, though containing innumerable sensations, is observed to lack eyes, mouth, hair, and indeed all bodily equipment which other heads are observed to contain? The plain fact is that this place must be kept clear of all such obstructions, of the slightest mistiness or coloring which could cloud my universe. In any case, when I start groping around for my lost hair, instead of finding it here, I only lose my exploring hand as well. It too is swallowed up in the abyss at the center of my being. Apparently, this yawning cavern, this unoccupied base of all my operations, this magical locality where I thought I kept my head, is in fact more like a beacon fire so fierce that all things approaching it are instantly and utterly consumed, in order that its world-illuminating brilliance and clarity shall never for a moment be obscured. As for these lurking aches and tickles and so on, they can no more quench or shade that central brightness that these mountains and clouds and sky can do so. Quite the contrary, they all exist in its shining, and through them it seems to shine. Present experience, whatever sense is employed, occurs only in an empty and absent head. For here and now, my world and my head are incompatibles. They won't mix. There's no room for both at once on these shoulders, and fortunately, it's my head, with all its anatomy, that has to go. This is not a matter of argument, or of philosophical acumen, or of working oneself up into a state, but of simple sight. Look, who's here, instead of think who's here. If I fail to see what I am, and especially what I am not, it's because I'm too busy imaginative, too spiritual, too adult and knowing to accept the situation exactly as I find it at the moment. A kind of alert idiocy is what I need. It takes an innocent eye and an empty head to see their own perfect emptiness. What am I even reading, man? This is so magical. Fuck. Holy moly, man. Probably, probably there's only one way of converting the skeptic who says, I still have a head here, and that is to invite him to come here and take a look for himself. Only he must be an honest reporter, describing what he observes, nothing else. Starting off on the far side of the room, he sees me as a full-length man with a head. But as he approaches, he finds half a man, then a head, then a blurred cheek or eye or nose, then a mere blur, and finally at the point of contact, nothing at all. Alternatively, if he happens to be equipped with the necessary scientific instruments, he reports that the blur resolves itself into tissues, then cell groups, then a cell nucleus, giant molecules, and so on, till it comes to a place where nothing is to be seen, to a space which is empty of all solid or material objects. In either case, the observer who comes here to see what it's really like finds what I find here, vacancy. And if, having discovered and shared my non-entity here, he were to turn around, looking out with me instead of looking into me, looking off in at me, he would again find what I find, that this vacancy is filled to capacity with everything imaginable. He too would find this central point exploding into an infinite volume, this nothing into the all, this here into everywhere. And if my skeptical observer still doubts his senses, he may try his camera instead, a device which, lacking memory and anticipation, can register only what's contained in the place where it happens to be. It records the same picture of me. Over there it takes a man midway, bits and pieces of a man, here no man and nothing, or else when pointed the other way around, the universe. Fuck. So this head is not a head but a wrong-headed idea. If I can still find a here, I'm seeing things and ought to hurry off to the doctor. It makes little difference whether I find a human head or an ass's head, a fried egg or a beautiful bunch of flowers. To have any top knot at all is to suffer from delusions. During my lucid intervals, however, I'm clearly headless here. Over there, on the other hand, I'm clearly far from headless. Indeed, I have more heads than I know what to do with. Concealed in my human observers and in cameras on display in picture frames, pulling faces behind shaving mirrors, peering out of doorknobs and spoons and coffee pots and anything which will take a high polish, my heads are always turning up, though more or less shrunken and distorted, twisted back to front, often the wrong way up, and multiplied to infinity. But there's one place where no head of mine can ever turn up, and that is here on my shoulders, where it would blot out the central void which is my very life source. Fortunately, nothing is able to do that. In fact, these loose heads can never amount more than impermanent and unprivileged accidents of the outer or phenomenal world, which, though altogether one with the central essence, fails to affect it in the slightest degree. So unprivileged indeed is my head in the mirror, that I don't necessarily recognize myself in the glass, and neither do I see the man over there, that the too familiar fellow who lives in the other room behind the looking glass and seemingly spends all his time staying into this room, that small, dull, circumscribed, particularized, aging, and oh so vulnerable gazer, as opposite to every way of my real self eerie. I have never been anything but this ageless, adamantine, measureless, lucid, and altogether immaculate void. It is unthinkable that I could ever have been confused, that staring wraith over there with what I plainly perceive myself to be here and now and forever. What is all this? Man. This is so surreal, man. Let's continue. Film directors are practical people, much more interested in the telling recreation of an experience than in discerning the nature of the experience, but in fact the one involves some of the other. Certainly these experts are well aware how feeble my reaction is to a film of a vehicle obviously driven by someone else, compared with my reaction to a film of a vehicle apparently driven by myself. In the first instance, I'm a spectator on the pavement, observing two similar cars swiftly approaching, colliding, killing the drivers, bursting into flames, and I'm mildly impressive. In the second, I am the driver, headless of the course, like all first-person drivers, and my car, what little there is of it, is stationary. Here are my swaying knees, my foot hard down on the accelerator, my hands struggling with the steering wheel, the long bonnet sloping away in front, telegraph poles whistling by, the road shaking this way and that. The other cars, tiny at first but looming larger and larger, coming straight at me, and then the crash, a great flash of light and an empty silence. I sink back onto my seat and get my breath back. I've been taken for a ride. However, the film, these first-person experiences, two ways are possible. Either a headless dummy is photographed with the camera in place of the head, or a real man is photographed with his head held far back or to one side to make room for the camera. In other words, to ensure that I shall identify myself with the actor, his head is got to go out of the way. He must be my kind of man. For a picture of me with the head is no likeness at all. It's a portrait of a complete stranger, a case of mistaken identity. It's curious that anyone should go to the advertising man for a glimpse into the deepest and simplest truths about himself. Or also that an elaborate modern invention like the cinema should help get rid anyone of an illusion which very young children and animals are free of. But human capacity for self-deception has surely never been complete. A profound, though dim awareness of the human condition may well explain the popularity of the many old cults and legends of loose and flying heads, of one-eyed or headless monsters, and apparitions of human bodies with non-human heads, and martyrs who walked and talked after their heads were cut off. Fantastic pictures, no doubt, but nearer than common sense ever gets to a true portrait of this man. But if I have no head or face or eyes here, how on earth do I see you, and what are eyes for anyway? The truth is that the verb to see has two quite opposite things. When see, when we observe a couple conversing, we say that they see each other, though their faces remain intact and some feet apart. But when I see your face is all mine, nothing, you're the end of me. Yet we use the same little word for both operations, and of course the same word has to mean the same thing. What actually goes on between third persons as such is visual communication, that continuous and self-contained chain of physical processes. Visual scientists can find no chink where mind or seeing could be slipped in, or if it could make any difference. True seeing, by contrast, is first person and so eyeless. In the language of the sages, only the Buddha nature, or Brahman, or Allah, or God sees or hears or experiences anything at all. Fuck, man, this was written by D. Harding, all that I read just now. Reflections. We have been presented with a charmingly childish and a solipsistic. Yeah, so solipsism is one where it's selfish, self-centeredness, the view or theory that self is all that can be known to exist. Reflections. We have been presented with a charmingly childish and solipsistic view of the human condition. It is something that, at an intellectual level, offends and appalls us. Can anyone sincerely entertain such notions without embarrassment? Yet, to some primitive level in us, it speaks clearly. That is the level at which we cannot accept the notion of our own death. In many of views, that level has been submerged and concealed for so long that we forget how incomprehensible is the concept of personal non-existence. We can so easily, it seems, extrapolate from the non-existence of others to the potential non-existence one day of ourselves. Yet how can it be a day when I die? After all, a day is a time with light and sounds. When I die, there will be none of those. Oh yes, there will be, protests an inner voice. Just because I won't be there to experience them doesn't mean they won't exist. That's so solipsistic. My inner voice, coerced by the power of simple syllogism, has reluctantly overridden the notion that I'm a necessary ingredient of the universe. That syllogism is roughly this. All human beings are mortal. I'm a human being, therefore I'm immortal. But for the substitution of I for Socrates, this is the most classical of all syllogism. Okay, what's a syllogism again? A form of reasoning in which conclusions are drawn from two or assumed propositions. The first premise presumes an abstract category, the class of human beings. The second premise is that I do belong to that class, despite the seemingly radical difference between myself and every other member of that class. Oh man. The idea of classes about which general statements can be made is not so shocking, but it seems to be a rather advanced property of intelligence to be able to formulate classes beyond those that are part of an innate repertoire. Bees seem to have the class flower down pretty well, but it's doubtful they can formulate a concept of chimney or human. Dogs and cats seem to be able to manufacture new classes such as food dish, door, toy, and so on. But people are by far the best at piling up of new category upon new category. This capacity is at the core of human nature and is a profound source of joy. Sportscasters and scientists and artists all give us great pleasure in their formulation of new kinds of concepts that enter our mental vocabulary. The other part of the first premise is the general concept of death. That something can vanish or be destroyed is a very early discovery. The food in the spoon vanishes, the rattle falls off the high chair. Mommy goes away for a while, the balloon pops, the newspaper in the fireplace burns up, the house a block down the street is razed, and so on. All very shocking and disturbing, certainly, but still acceptable. The swatted fly, the sprayed mosquitoes, these build on the previous abstractions, and we come to the general concept of death. So much for the first premise. The second premise is a tricky one. As a child, I formulated the abstraction human being by seeing things outside of me that had something in common appearance, behavior, and so on. That this particular class could then fold back on me and engulf me. This realization necessarily comes at a later stage of cognitive development and must be quite a shocking experience, although probably most of us do not remember it happening. The truly amazing step, though, is the conjunction of the two premises. By the time we've developed the mental power to formulate them both, we've also developed the respect for the compelling of simple logic. But the sudden conjunction of these two premises slaps us in the face unexpectedly. It's an ugly, brutal blow that sends us reeling probably for days, weeks, and months, actually for years, for our whole lives. But somehow we suppress the conflict and turn it in other directions. Do higher animals have the ability to see themselves as members of a class? Is a dog capable of thinking the thought, I bet I look though like those dogs over there? Imagine the following gory situation. A ring is formed of, say, 20 animals of one sort. An evil human repeatedly spins a dial and walks over to the designated animal and knifes it to death in front of the remaining ones. Is it likely that each one will realize its impending doom and will think, that animal over there is just like me, and my goose may soon be cooked just as his was? Oh no! Patrick's note. Yes, animals do know. Cows at the abattoir know they're going to be slaughtered. Smack one dog and my others know that they better go hide. This ability to snap oneself onto others seems to be the exclusive properties of members of higher species. One begins by making partial mappings. I have feet, you have feet, I have hands, you have hands. These partial mappings can then induce a total mapping. Pretty soon I conclude from your having a head that I too have one, although I can't see mine. By this, stepping outside myself is a gigantic and, in some ways, self-denying step. It contradicts much direct knowledge about myself. It's like Harding's two distinct types of verb to see, which apply to myself. It's quite clear another thing than when it applies to you. The power of this distinction gets overcome, however, by the sheer weight of too many mappings happening all the time. Mappings all the time, establishing without doubt my membership in class that I formulated originally without regard to myself. So logic overrides intuition. Just as we could come to believe that our Earth can be round, as is the alien moon, without people falling off, so we finally come to believe that the solipsistic view is nutty. Only a powerful vision such as Harding's Himalayan experience can return us to that primordial sense of self and otherness which is at the root of the problems of consciousness, soul, and self. Do I have a brain? Will I actually die? We all think about such questions many times during our lives. Occasionally, probably every imaginative person thinks that all of life is a huge joke or hoax, perhaps a psychology experiment being perpetrated by some inconceivable super being, seeing how far it can push us into believing obvious absurdities. The idea that sounds I can't really understand really means something. The idea that someone can hear Chopin or eat chocolate ice cream without loving it. The idea that light goes at the same speed in any reference frame. The idea that I am made of inanimate atoms, the idea of my own death, and so on. But unfortunately, or fortunately, that conspiracy theory undermines itself since it postulates another mind, in fact a super intelligence and therefore inconceivable one, in order to explain away other mysteries. There seems to be no alternative to accepting some sort of incomprehensible quality in existence. Take your pick. We all fluctuate delicately between a subjective and objective view of the world, and this quandary is central to human nature. DRH. Fucking hell, this is so awesome. This blew my freaking mind. So who's the person who wrote this? D. Harding. Oh man, I'm so excited to read the other parts of the book. There's one more chapter in this part, but I think I'm gonna wrap up here. We'll do the third chapter next time, so I'm gonna call it part 1. Yeah. Alright, so I'll see you people in the next video if you're watching this sometime in the future, because I don't know what's gonna watch. No one's gonna be watching this as I'm recording it, because I'm not. No, I don't want to talk about it. Alright, let's meet in the next video. Bye bye.